Before we talk about goals, strategy, or influence, before we think about leading others, we need to understand something fundamental. Leadership begins in the nervous system. At the core of everything you do, think, and feel is your nervous system. It's not just a collection of neurons firing randomly. It's a highly adaptive, responsive system designed to assess safety, threat, and opportunity in real time. And whether you're aware of it or not, your ability to lead, your ability to communicate clearly, stay grounded under pressure, make high-stakes decisions, and inspire trust is directly tied to how well your nervous system is regulated. Let's start with something simple but often overlooked: your state. Your internal physiological state, heart rate, breath rate, muscle tone, visual focus, affects how your brain processes information. It determines whether you're reactive or strategic. It governs whether you shrink under pressure or expand into it. Most people wait until they feel calm or confident to act like leaders. That's backward. True leaders know how to induce the state required for performance on demand. And it starts with vision and breath. When you're in a stress state, high adrenaline, shallow breath, tunnel vision, your nervous system is telling you survive. That's useful if you're running from danger. But it's a liability if you're giving a talk, making a hard decision, or resolving conflict. A simple adjustment, broadening your field of vision, relaxing your gaze to peripheral, sends a signal to your brainstem that you're safe. Safety shifts your nervous system out of high alert and into a state of cognitive flexibility and presence. That one change can instantly alter how you show up. Next breath. Most people under stress start breathing from the chest, fast and shallow. That reinforces sympathetic arousal, fight or flight mode. Instead, try this. Take one long inhale through the nose, followed by a quick second inhale, then a long, slow exhale. That's called a physiological sigh. It's the fastest science-supported way to reduce stress in real time. 1 to 3 rounds, and you'll feel it. Your shoulders drop, your thoughts slow down, your tone of voice deepens. That's not magic. That's your nervous system shifting from chaos to control. Posture is another access point. The nervous system maps from the body up, not just brain down. Slumped shoulders and a lowered chin signal defeat, both to others and to your own brain. A straight spine, open chest, and stable stance activate circuits associated with confidence and readiness. Your body informs your brain, and your brain directs your behavior. You cannot lead with a physiology that screams, "I'm overwhelmed." You have to train your body to send the right signals regardless of how you feel. Now let's talk about neuroplasticity, your nervous system's ability to rewire itself through experience. Every time you face stress and stay grounded, every time you breathe through discomfort instead of reacting to it, you're training leadership into your biology. You're not just learning it mentally, you're encoding it physically. This is not abstract inspiration. This is how your brain works. Action repeated under elevated emotional load gets hardwired. This is why exposure to pressure, done strategically, creates resilient leaders. Controlled stress followed by recovery, that's the formula. And it's accessible to everyone. But the real game changer is awareness. Leadership begins with awareness of your own state, your physiological and emotional signals. Can you detect when your pulse speeds up, when your jaw tightens, when your breath shifts? That's the first skill. Most people blow right past those signals and wonder why they snap at people or freeze under pressure. But if you can detect early signals, you can intercept them. You can intervene before the behavior happens. That's self-leadership. And nobody will follow you until you can lead yourself in those moments. So we flip the script. Leadership doesn't start with charisma or communication. It starts with internal regulation. If your nervous system is chaotic, your decisions will be impulsive, your communication will be reactive, and your team will mirror that chaos. But if your nervous system is calm, focused, and aware, that becomes contagious too. People don't follow words. They follow nervous systems. They follow signals of safety, direction, and presence. You become that signal, not by pretending to be fearless, but by becoming physiologically grounded enough to act in the presence of fear. Leadership, then, is not just a skill, it's a biological process. And like any process, it can be trained. You don't need perfect genetics or perfect confidence. You need protocols, breath, vision, posture, awareness, daily reps. Just like you train a muscle, you can train your leadership circuitry. This is where it begins. Not in theory, but in your body. We're told that motivation is everything. That the key to leadership, to achievement, to progress is to feel inspired. But here's what most people don't understand. Motivation is unreliable. It's chemically unstable. It spikes and it crashes. It's influenced by sleep, blood glucose, external feedback, even the weather. If your ability to lead depends on motivation, then your leadership is built on sand. Clarity, on the other hand, is stable. It's structural. It doesn't depend on how you feel. It depends on what you understand. When you're clear on what matters, clear on the next step, clear on your direction, you don't need a dopamine surge to take action. You move because you've built a system that runs regardless of how inspired you are. In neuroscience, clarity is not some mystical trait. It's a cognitive state that reduces friction between intention and execution. The brain, when overwhelmed by ambiguity or conflicting priorities, shifts into what's called a default mode network, which is associated with rumination, procrastination, and decreased task performance. In contrast, clarity switches the brain into task-positive networks, especially the prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate cortex, which are involved in focus, decision-making, and goal-directed behavior. That means clarity is not just helpful, it's neurobiologically efficient. You can think of motivation like a match. It burns hot and fast. Clarity is like a pilot light. It stays on. It gives you access to consistent low-friction energy because it reduces the mental load of decision-making. When you wake up in the morning and you know exactly what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how it ties into something meaningful, the need to feel motivated drops dramatically. Let's get even more practical. Say you're leading a team and the energy is low. You could try to motivate them with hype, slogans, and intensity, but that only lasts until the next meeting. Or you can bring clarity. What are we trying to achieve? Why does it matter? What are the 3 critical actions this week? What does success look like in measurable terms? Those questions generate traction, not excitement, but movement. And in the nervous system, movement creates momentum, which then feeds the dopaminergic system to sustain drive. Here's something counterintuitive. Motivation often comes after clarity and action, not before it. You don't get motivated, then act. You act from clarity, then feel momentum, and that backfeeds motivation. That's how the loop actually works. But here's where most aspiring leaders get stuck. They chase motivation because they haven't built clarity into their environment. Your brain needs visual cues, tactile structure, and feedback loops to feel safe in the pursuit of goals. If everything is open-ended and uncertain, your nervous system perceives it as risk. That creates hesitation, it increases cortisol, it makes you second guess and delay. But when your workspace calendar and daily behaviors are aligned with your purpose, your brain perceives order and it moves forward more easily. Think of clarity as a form of neural alignment. When your values, vision, and behavior are in sync, there's less crosstalk in your mind, less noise. And when the noise drops, signal increases. That's clarity, not hype, not pressure, just signal, just knowing what matters and acting on it repeatedly. And to build it, you need systems. Journaling is one, Writing down your top 3 priorities the night before changes your prefrontal cortex activity the next morning. That's not anecdotal. That's supported by research in behavioral neuroscience. Planning activates goal circuits even in your sleep. You wake up more ready, more direct, more focused. That's the power of clarity over motivation. Another tool, implementation intentions. If X happens, I'll do Y. This removes ambiguity from your day. It creates mental scripts that reduce decision fatigue and increase follow-through. That's clarity in action. It's why elite performers don't rely on willpower. They rely on protocols, clear steps, preloaded behaviors. That frees up cognitive energy for leadership, creativity, and adaptation. This is the difference between amateurs and professionals. In any field, professionals have clarity baked into their system. They know what matters. They know what to ignore. They know what the next step is, even when they don't feel like taking it. And that's leadership, not waiting for the emotional wave of motivation, but walking through the storm with a compass in hand, deliberately. They use language not just to describe their world, but to shape their engagement with it. When we talk about leadership or growth, people tend to focus on outcomes, results, titles, recognition. But those things are the final expression of something much more foundational, identity. And identity isn't built in moments of inspiration or peak performance. Identity is built through repetition, through what you do consistently, not occasionally. Who you are is what you do daily. This is not a motivational slogan. It's a biological process. Your brain is constantly scanning your behavior and using that data to update its internal model of who you are. Every time you act, you cast a vote toward a certain identity. And over time, those votes accumulate. They form patterns. The patterns become your self-image, and your self-perceived determines the baseline for your actions, your resilience, and your standards, especially under pressure. This is called self-signaling. In neuroscience and behavioral psychology, self-signaling refers to the process by which your actions serve as evidence to your brain about who you are. For example, if you consistently show up on time, your brain begins to believe, I am someone who's reliable. If you skip hard conversations, it forms the opposite. I avoid conflict. These beliefs aren't random. They're built through the behaviors you reinforce. Now, here's the important part. Identity compounds. Just like money grows through compounding interest, behavior grows through neural reinforcement. Every time you act in alignment with the person you want to become, you strengthen that identity's neural pathway. You're literally carving deeper circuits in your brain. And the deeper those circuits, the less friction you feel the next time you take that same action. Let's break this down practically. Say you want to become a more decisive leader. It's not going to happen by waiting for a moment when you suddenly feel confident. It happens by making small, deliberate decisions daily. Every time you decide quickly and own the outcome, even in low-stakes situations, you're wiring decisiveness into your nervous system. You're not performing confidence. You're constructing it biologically. This is why habits matter so much, not because they're trendy or easy to track on an app, but because they're the raw materials of identity. You brush your teeth not because it's hard, but because your brain identifies as someone who does that every day. That behavior has fused with who you are. The same principle applies to journaling, preparing for meetings, training your body, regulating your emotions. None of those things are about the task itself. They're about teaching your brain, this is what I do, this is who I am. Consistency beats intensity. Not because intensity is bad, but because the brain doesn't respond to what you do once. It responds to what you do over and over and over again. Identity is not a declaration. It's an accumulation. You can tell yourself, I'm a leader all day, but your nervous system will only believe it if your actions support it across time. And here's where the compounding effect really kicks in. Once your brain believes a certain identity, It begins to automate behaviors that match it. That's how change becomes easier. Once you believe you're someone who trains daily, you stop negotiating with yourself about the gym. Once you believe you're someone who handles conflict directly, you stop rehearsing avoidance scripts. Identity simplifies decision-making because your actions now have a default setting, and that default is aligned with who you've become. Even your emotional responses change. If you've built the identity of someone who doesn't quit under pressure, your brain starts to interpret stress as a signal to lean in, not retreat. This isn't willpower, it's preloaded interpretation built through reps. The more data your brain collects that this is who we are, the less resistance it gives when that behavior is triggered again. But identity can compound in the wrong direction too. Skip your protocols repeatedly, and the brain begins to associate you with inconsistency. Avoid feedback loops, and it starts to believe you're fragile. These aren't character flaws. They're just the natural result of repeated patterns. You don't rise to your potential. You fall to your habits. And your habits build your identity. That's why every day matters, not because each one is special, but because each one contributes to your neural archive of evidence. Your identity isn't fixed. It's not a personality type. It's a dynamic, responsive system that updates based on what you do. There's a pervasive myth that needs to be dismantled, that stress is bad, that it should be avoided, that a great leader is someone who's calm all the time. That's not just inaccurate, it's biologically wrong. Stress is not the enemy. In fact, it's essential. It's how your brain and body grow. The real problem isn't stress. It's a failure to recover from it. Let's get scientific for a moment. When you're under stress, whether it's preparing for a public presentation, managing conflict in your team, or pushing through uncertainty, your body releases adrenaline, cortisol, and norepinephrine. These chemicals sharpen attention, increase glucose availability, and prime your nervous system for action. That's not dysfunction. That's evolution doing its job. It's your body saying something important is happening, be ready. But that response has a cost. It burns energy. It taxes the immune system. It narrows focus and increases emotional sensitivity. And if that state is prolonged, if you stay in it without downregulation, it turns from productive stress into chronic overload. That's where performance crashes. That's where leadership fails. Not because of the stress, but because of the lack of strategic recovery. Stress applied deliberately and managed properly actually makes you stronger. This is called hormetic stress. It's the principle behind weight training, cold exposure, public speaking, fasting, even high-stakes decision-making. You introduce controlled doses of challenge to trigger adaptation. But without recovery, the same stimulus that could make you better ends up breaking you. Here's where leaders go wrong. They either avoid stress completely, never stepping into the ring, or they go all in, grind 24/7, and never recover. Both strategies fail. Real leadership, sustainable leadership, requires intentional oscillation between high stress and high recovery. That's how your nervous system learns to stay functional under pressure. You don't avoid stress, you train for it, and then you recover like it's your job. Now, let's talk recovery. This isn't about bubble baths and weekends off. Recovery is not relaxation, it's regulation. It's the deliberate downshifting of your autonomic nervous system from sympathetic, parasympathetic rest and digest. The more efficiently you can make that shift, the more resilient you become. There are tools for this. Breath work is one of the fastest and most effective. A long exhale activates the vagus nerve and signals safety to your brainstem. Something as simple as a 1-2 breathing ratio, say 4 seconds in, 8 seconds out, can shift your state in under 90 seconds. Done consistently after a high-stress moment, it builds the neural feedback loops of control. Another recovery tool, non-sleep deep rest. NSDR. This includes practices like yoga nidra or guided body scans. Studies show that even 10-20 minutes of NSDR can restore dopamine levels and improve learning retention after intense effort. That's not optional for leaders. It's a performance enhancer. Sleep, of course, is the foundation. Leadership decisions are made in the prefrontal cortex, which is impaired after even mild sleep deprivation. If you're trying to lead on 5 hours of sleep, you're not a warrior. You're compromised. You're more emotionally reactive, less cognitively flexible, and less capable of reading social cues. That's not grit. That's a liability. There's also mental recovery, and this is often overlooked. Strategic detachment, such as time away from problem solving, actually strengthens creative and lateral thinking. Walking without your phone, reading fiction, time in nature, these are not luxuries. They activate the brain's default mode network, allowing you to process, integrate, and innovate. Leaders who never mentally detach slowly become cognitively rigid and emotionally fatigued, even if they're physically rested. The key is cyclical recovery. Think about your day in intervals, not marathons. Intense focus for 90 minutes, followed by 10-15 minutes of downregulation. Deep work in the morning, light task switching in the afternoon, stress exposure during training or negotiation, followed by deliberate decompression. This rhythm trains your system to handle high stress without breaking. It's not about avoiding intensity. It's about recovering with intention. Stress isn't what burns you out. It's staying in a stress state without exits. It's going hard and never coming down. It's trying to perform at a high level without respecting the biological cost. Stress is a tool. Recovery is the strategy that makes it useful. What you do consistently is not just driven by your goals, your training, or your environment. It's driven by the narrative running in the background of your mind. Your internal story, the way you interpret discomfort, challenge, success, and failure, is one of the most powerful behavioral drivers in your brain. This isn't metaphorical. In neuroscience, the default mode network, DMN, is the system responsible for self-referential thinking, how you relate to yourself, your identity, your memories, and your imagined future. When you're not focused on a task, your brain defaults to story building. It loops on past experiences, current self-perception, and future projections. That's the engine of your narrative. And if it's not managed consciously, it will quietly shape your behavior, your emotions, and your decisions without your awareness. Leadership doesn't begin with a script. It begins with your self-narrative. The sentence, "I'm not ready," isn't just a thought. It's a neural loop that downregulates systems of motivation and engagement. The thought, "I always find a way," activates a different set of circuits, those involved in agency, planning, and reward anticipation. The difference isn't just psychological, it's biological. Your story literally influences which brain networks activate in response to challenge. Here's a practical example. Two leaders face the same obstacle, a failed product launch. One tells himself, "I always mess up big opportunities," and his brain reinforces this with evidence from the past, times he hesitated, times he miscalculated. That reinforces emotional withdrawal and performance inhibition. The other tells herself, "Every failure gives me data and I use it fast," which activates regions like the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and the anterior cingulate areas responsible for problem solving, error correction, and forward movement. Same situation, different neural response, different outcome. The story is the switch. This is not about toxic positivity. It's not about pretending things are fine when they're not. It's about accurate narrative framing. It's about understanding how the way you interpret events determines your behavioral output. Language is not just communication. It's instruction to the nervous system. When you say, "I'm overwhelmed," you reinforce neural pathways that amplify threat response. When you say, "I'm stretched, but I'm learning," You shift toward adaptive stress interpretation. That subtle linguistic reframe can change your posture, your breath, your tone, and your behavior, because the story changes your state. Leaders who understand this don't just manage performance, they manage meaning. They use narrative reframing as a tool of emotional regulation and strategic clarity. When under pressure, they don't collapse into "why me" or "I can't handle this." They shift to "this is a test of my capacity," or "pressure means I'm near the edge of growth." These aren't just mantras, they're neurological interventions. They redirect attention, regulate cortisol output, and prime the system for adaptive action. And this isn't limited to internal dialogue. It also applies to how leaders frame stories for others. Teams don't follow data, they follow direction. And direction is built through story. If you present a vision with fear-based framing, you activate threat circuits in your team. Their behavior becomes cautious, compliance-driven, and reactive. If you frame the same goal with an opportunity-based narrative, this is where we get to redefine who we are. You activate circuits related to innovation, reward-seeking, and ownership. Narrative is not fluff. It's architecture. It builds identity layer by layer, and identity governs behavior. You will not outperform your identity, and your identity is built through repeated stories about who you are, what you're capable of, and what you expect of yourself when things are hard. Even single word shifts matter. Saying "I get to" instead of "I have to" activates a different motivational network. "I'm in process" feels and behaves differently than "I'm behind." These micro narratives shape emotional tone, engagement level, and the speed at which you return to task after disruption. In high-performance environments, these distinctions aren't subtle. They're the difference between execution and paralysis. The most effective leaders are not the ones who feel the best. They're the ones who build the most useful internal narrative and revise it with discipline. They audit their story the same way they audit a budget, looking for blind spots, distortions, and inefficiencies. Then they rebuild it.